Chris Carter of the Locked On Steelers podcast here. We take a lot of your calls on today's show as you ask several questions about the draft, free agency, Steelers returning or leaving. Lots of questions we get into here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Steelers, your daily Pittsburgh Steelers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter, bringing you your daily dose of all things in the Pittsburgh Steelers. As always, you can find the show in your favorite podcasting apps and on YouTube. Like this video if you enjoy it. Subscribe to this YouTube channel to get all of your daily Monday through Friday episodes as well as our bonus content. We thank you for making us your first listen every day because we're your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase on the Game Time app. Now, Steelers fans, we get a lot of calls into our hotline here on Locked On Steelers podcast. As always, you can call in 412-223-6644. Leave your name, where you're from, and keep your question under a minute, and you can get a chance to be on the show. Because we are way backed up with calls. Like right now, I believe I have about 30 calls that I haven't addressed, and that's not even including the ones that I'm going to have today. So if your call isn't getting on, understand that you're amongst a lot of people who call in, and we've already addressed several calls in this offseason. But without further ado, let's get to some of those calls. And I wanted to lead it off with this first segment about a topic we tapped a little bit yesterday with Nick Farabaugh on the show. But let's talk more about these linebackers and the Steelers' need there. Here's Joe from New Orleans.
Shout out Christopher Carter. This is Joe, a.k.a. the Nola Yens, away from New Orleans. You hear me? Love the show, big diehard Steelers fan in the down south 504. I just have a quick question for you. With middle linebacker being such a big question, I feel like Cole is the answer, but ACLs could be a little bit sketchy after so many, tries or whatever. So do you think we go draft one or pick one up at free agency? And if we draft one, where should we get one from? Thank you. Love the show. Always tuning in every morning. Shout out Locked On Steelers.
Shout out to you, Joe. Thanks so much for tuning in. Appreciate everyone who tunes in and calls in to get their questions. So, Joe, let's address a few things. I'm going to focus specifically on the draft because, frankly, I think the Steelers, talent-wise, did a good job addressing free agency, addressing linebacker through free agency last year. Quan Alexander was good. Cole Holcomb was good. Landon Roberts was really good. The problem was all three of them were injured by the end of the season. Two of them were out for the season by mid-year. So, that was just the issue that they ran into. But I think they could use a solid rookie investment or solid draft pick at the linebacker position to be part of the future there. Because you could bring back, Holcomb and Roberts are already coming back. Maybe Alexander comes back if you could sign him to a cheap deal. And then if you could draft a linebacker, you can have 4 active linebackers ready to go at any point in time. So even if you lose 2 again for the season, you still got 2 that you can rely upon, and you're not calling up practice squatters. So that would be my thing there. Now, if you look at this year's linebacker draft class, the guy that's been at the top of the class for quite some time for a lot of people is Edgerrin Cooper, the guy at Texas A&M. And I think he'd be a great addition if they get him in the second round. That'd be a solid fit. He's an athlete. He's good. He's well-sized. He played well. He has good instincts. He can perform at several different layers. But the guy that, and this is why I always say, like, big boards and everything early, whenever someone asks me to give me my big board in like December or even January after the Steelers are out of the playoffs or something, I'm like, hey, it's way too early to assemble those. Like, it's really need to start. You kind of need to get through the chunk of pro days before I think big boards become solidified. And the reason I say that about this is because go look at PFF's big board, because PFF always has their rankings, and as much as PFF's wrong about grades and stuff all the time, they are a great database of information to collect things. And their rankings of players in this draft class, Payton Wilson was seen as like a guy that would be picked in the 80s. All of a sudden now he's projected to be like the 33rd best player of this draft class, and it's because people are coming around to his tape and looking at, whoa, that guy is 6'4" and can move, and he can intercept passes, he can make tackles, he can cover tight ends, he can jump with the best of them, he can hit with the best of them. Only thing that's holding him back is really his injury history. And you look at that, I like the things that he brings to the table. Now, injury-wise, yeah, that's a concern. That's kind of what you were running into with your linebacker situation in the first place. But if you were to get a healthy Payton Wilson in the Steelers linebacker room, like he'd be another guy that would, because he's so big and fast at linebacker, he could be an answer to also keeping Minkah Fitzpatrick back in the pure safety role, because as much as we talk about this needing a safety to take on some of those roles, the Steelers need cover linebackers, and their linebackers were good this year, and they did a good job covering in the ways that they're supposed to cover. Like Landon Roberts, he even kind of made jokes with us in the media sometimes, being like, y'all said I couldn't cover, and he covered well in certain situations. But Landon Roberts covered well in taking short intermediate routes away, running with running backs, doing things like that. You wouldn't ask Landon Roberts to do the things that like Ryan Shazier would do. Like he would run deep down the field with tight ends, or, run with wide receivers at times. Even Devin Bush in his rookie season, when he was actually playing well, like he was able to cover Mark Andrews and intercepted Lamar Jackson like 15, 20 yards downfield on a play. Those are the type of the plays that I think the Steelers, if they had at linebacker, it could help them a lot with their team chemistry on defense. I think Wilson could be that kind of a guy. I think Cooper can be that guy. But after that, you get into a lot more run stuffer type linebackers like Junior Colson out of Michigan. I still think Jeremiah Trotter could really work out. Jeremiah Trotter Jr. out of Clemson. He came into the year before the season started as kind of like everyone looking at him as maybe the top linebacker of this draft class. But still, I think if you get any one of those four, you can add a really good linebacker to your room. Now, you can still get guys like Cedric Gray out of North Carolina. I like his moxie and his tape that I've seen. And if you put him in, I think he could be like a 4th round pick. If you got him there, that'd be really good value. And he'd be another athlete. And the other thing about linebacker is that if you are expecting Holcomb and Roberts to be healthy to start the season, and if you do bring a Quan Alexander back, whoever you do draft doesn't have to be a 1st, 2nd, or 3rd rounder, because if it's a 4th rounder, you can say, all right, get used to things in training camp, get used to the defense, and then you'll be called, you'll be rotated in and eventually called upon, behind the guys who are NFL veterans. So I think the Steelers, because of this draft class, it's not a heavy linebacker class, it's not a super deep linebacker class, it's not one that has like several superstars in it, but I like the talent of some of the guys at the top, and I don't think that these guys are going to go 1st round. I think Payton Wilson and Edgerrin Cooper could go 2nd round, but they could also go 2nd round right where the Steelers are picking in the 2nd round, and that could be a good pick if the Steelers address one of their offensive line positions in the draft. So that to be said about Joe, yes, there are answers to linebacker. Some in free agency, of course. Patrick Queen's a big name, but I think that you could get younger on defense with getting a really young linebacker who can be kind of the core linebacker of your future core that you're trying to put together right now. They got Porter, they got Benton, so you've got a corner, you got a defensive lineman. What if you got a linebacker that's young with those guys that could be part of a new trio that kind of emerges in the Steelers defense? That should not be something that Omar Khan, Andy White, or Mike Tomlin overlook in this draft class for sure, because there are good options that will be available to them and not requiring a 1st round pick, so they can get their guy at center, or they can get a top flight corner or a top flight tackle. They can get one of those major positions of need and still get a really good linebacker. And let's face it, the Steelers, whenever they've been good in their franchise's history, they've had good to great linebacker play, and they need, and I no, not even good to great linebacker play. And that's just part of what they've always been. And I know some people have felt that linebacker is phasing out of the NFL as an important position, but go back and look at what linebackers did for the Chiefs. They were a big part of what they've won, how they won the last 2 Super Bowls. They're a big part of what make the Niners defense good. They're a big part of what made the Ravens defense good this year. They'll be a big part of a great Steelers defense if the Steelers can get the right ones and add it here. And I think there's a couple that they can get in the 2nd or 3rd round who would be good investments into being part of that future Steelers defense if they went at linebacker. But we had a few callers that were asking questions about the Mock Draft Monday show that we did and the draft that we selected, and maybe there were some oversights. We'll address that and several other of your calls right here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. Stick with us. We'll be right back. But first, I want to remind you this show is brought to you by Game Time. Buying tickets to your favorite events shouldn't be stressful. That's why Game Time is the fast and easy way to buy tickets for all the sports, music, comedy, and theater events near you. Game Time is an app you can download right to your phone and get killer deals even on last-minute tickets or even on tickets that are up to an hour after your event has started. So whether you're running late to your concert or you just realized you could get to the game that you really wanted to see, but you're running late for it, Game Time is an app that can still help you get the best prices and the best tickets every single time. The Game Time app allows you to book tickets so late that you can even beat the scalpers and the ticket booth with both prices and the best views. And sometimes when you're trying to get the best prices, sometimes you're not sure about the ticket, the value of the ticket that you're getting or the view that you'll have from the seat. From the Game Time app, you can see the view right from your seat. When you look into the app, it shows you in the arena to make sure that you're getting the right value for the price that you're about to pay. So make sure that you go get the Game Time app. And when you do, they also give you a best price guarantee where if you find tickets for the same section in a row for less somewhere else, Game Time credits you 110% of the difference of those prices. Snag the tickets without the stress with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase, or go to the website gametime.co. Terms and conditions apply. Create an account and redeem code LOCKEDON for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast, I'm your host, Chris Carter. We continue taking your calls here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. As always, call in 412-223-6644. This next question comes from Carlos, and it's a response to our Mock Draft Monday episode. Here's Carlos from Los Angeles.
Hey, Chris, this is Carlos from Los Angeles. I noticed that in your mock drafts, you don't have any defensive linemen. And I think that, of course, offensive linemen for the Steelers is an immediate need, but I think the second best immediate need is defensive linemen. And again, I noticed that you don't have any in any of your mock drafts. Any reason for that? Here we go. Love the show.
Thank you, Carlos, and I appreciate the question. Now, I want to point out my mock drafts are just early mock drafts. These are just who I think, when I looked at values as far as who went where, that's where it fit. I'm not ruling out, Carlos, the idea of the Steelers taking a defensive lineman in this draft class because they do need another guy to pair with Keanu Benton for the long term, and that should be something that they absolutely have their eyes on. And there's some good guys out there. Byron Murphy, Jerzon Newton, those are the top two guys that you're looking at right now as far as this draft class. I also like Tavondre Sweat out of Texas. I think Michael Hall Jr. out of Ohio State could be a good 4th round pick if he's still hanging around there. There's other guys like Leonard Taylor and Dwayne Carter who I think could be good middle round picks. Tyler Davis might be a good fourth or 5th rounder out of Clemson. But the thing is that this isn't, at least on paper, it's not a great defensive line class. And so when I'm looking at some of these other classes, this is a great cornerback class. There's a lot of offensive tackles in this class. Center's a big need. There's always great wide receivers. So oftentimes when I'm going through these early mock drafts, I'm just more so focusing on where I think great value can be and also for what the Steelers could get. Because here's the other thing. I think there's 2 guys that people are looking at right now as potential 1st round defensive lineman picks, and that's Jerzon Newton out of Illinois and Byron Murphy II out of Texas. Those 2 guys, they could both be there, or either one of them or both of them could be there when the Steelers pick at 20 in the 1st round. The problem is if you take one there, you are taking a really big swing that you're going to be able to find a center still in the 2nd round while also addressing corner and other positions of need like offensive tackle and other things like that. And frankly, I do think they could use help on the defensive line. But frankly, with the way they're situated right now, if Cam Hayward does come back this next season, you still have Keanu Benton who's on the rise. We'll see if they keep Larry Ogunjobi. And we'll get to some of the other options here on defensive line that they currently have on the roster in a minute, because that's actually kind of part of another question that we'll answer here. But they have some answers at defensive line. Could they get better and younger? Absolutely. And I do think it's something that they need to take a look at, just like they need to take a look at linebacker. But so far early on, just my mock drafts are just kind of, just taking these early looks at what we're looking at here, what the Steelers could consider in different situations. So don't take my mock drafts as like the gospel just yet. These are just my ideas so far as like, how things could play out. And if certain things go to certain players drop to certain spots, what could the Steelers do in those situations? So, with all that being said, defensive line is on the books for the Steelers, in my opinion. It's just not something that I find as a super high value in this draft for where guys might fall. But we'll see how that plays out. But to your point, it is something that is a concern. But we had another caller call in, Doug, about a question that was about some Steelers players that are on the roster, including one of the defensive linemen who is supposed to be part of the youth movement moving forward. Here's Doug from Plum asking questions about that.
Hi, this is Doug Phillips from Plumboro. I have a question about guys like Calvin Austin and DeMarvin Leal when they get drafted. And it is said that these guys have to find their own niche on the team. Now, I believe these guys have been let down by the team because they were drafted. They weren't signed here and came here as a free agent. So it's up to the team to find these guys a niche and make them productive in their scheme, either defense or offense. So I'd like to hear your comments. I'll hang up now, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Doug. Appreciate the call. Again, 412-223-6644 to get your question on the air. Doug, I do think the Steelers, their position as far as how things have worked out has kind of, not allowed Austin or Leal to really shine. Now, it's kind of crazy. It's funny you bring those two guys up because they were literally the picks one after another in the 2022 draft. Leal was taken 84th overall in the third round. Calvin Austin 138th overall in the fourth round of the 2022 draft. The two picks after both Kenny Pickett and George Pickens. But I look at a few things here. One, Calvin Austin's a bit different of a situation. He was hurt all of his rookie year. He never even made it out of like the second week of training camp. And then he came into this season and they found ways to use him, but there were a lot of problems on offense. And I think that coming into this year, this is their chance to kind of find real ways to use him in better fashions. It's also his chance to get better at getting off the line of scrimmage because when teams pressed him, he did have some problems fighting through those. And that's part of what's natural with a guy of his size. So that stuff kind of happens. But DeMarvin Leal is a really interesting character in all of this because I still like DeMarvin Leal. I praised him a lot when they picked him his rookie year. I thought he made some really good strides and I thought he has really good hands. And then he really didn't make a difference at the start of this year. And then he was a healthy scratch for like the last, I'd say like 6 or 7 games. I forget how long it was, but he was just healthily just not getting a helmet. And that's not a good sign for the Steelers for a second-year, third-round defensive lineman who you were hoping to be part of the future. And I think part of it is DeMarvin Leal, he's kind of a tweener. He's a guy who has come in. He's played some on the edge. He's played some on the defensive line. He kind of gets moved between them. And I think the Steelers were trying to see if they could say like, hey, he's going to be good at either one. You can flex him between the positions and he can just be one of those chess pieces that you have on the defensive front. But the problem is I think with the Steelers defense, they don't need right now an extra flex guy at edge rusher because TJ Watt, Alex Highsmith, and now Nick Herbig and Marcus Golden, they've all kind of done that job. And maybe DeMarvin Leal just hasn't won that job from those guys. And I think if you go back to 2022 when they drafted him, they needed some guy like that. Because you remember, that was the year that TJ Watt went down with an injury, and they were really limited at edge rusher. And I think DeMarvin Leal as a rookie, that was a tough thing to ask. Plus, he was hurt for a chunk of that year too. I think that he was in a tough spot there to be that guy. But this year, there has to be a clear message to DeMarvin Leal. So to your point about how the Steelers could find a niche for him, there has to be a clear message to DeMarvin Leal. Hey, we want you to be this, bulk up and play on the inside. Or we want you to be that, get quicker, get more explosive, and be ready to win on the edge. Because you know what, like Marcus Golden, if he's not back, maybe Leal and Herbig are the two edge guys behind Highsmith and Watt for the next couple years or so. That could be part of the answer. But I think if Leal, with his length and his athleticism, if he can just get stronger and be able to stand up in the middle of a defense and be a guy beside Benton, if they could become a 1-2 punch at defensive line for the future, that could be a great asset to the Steelers. But they need to find a use for him. And if he's not useful to him, it's going to be a wasted draft pick, and that's going to really hold back the team in a lot of ways. And again, Calvin Austin, to your point about him, I think that Calvin Austin just needs to be part of a working offense that knows what it wants to be and can fit him in there. Because as we saw for most of last year, the Steelers were trying to find an identity, and they did late in the season. And heck, he even scored a touchdown, I believe, in the playoffs. I think it was, or it might have been the Ravens game. I forget, but he scored he scored late in the season. He was a useful player when called upon, but it was kind of like he was the 6th or 7th option in the offense. And let's face it, Deontay Johnson, George Pickens, Pat Freiermuth, Najee Harris, and then Jalen Warren. And so then you're going with those 5 guys. And so then after that, then you're dealing with the Calvin Austins and the Darnell Washingtons. So I think when an offense is struggling to feed their primary playmakers in the right spots, it's going to struggle even more to feed the secondary guys like Calvin Austin, like Darnell Washington. So I agree with you. They needs to, and I think Arthur Smith, that's something that he needs to do. They need to find their bread and butter plays so that their primary guys are becoming playmakers, and then their secondary guys like Austin can come in and become something. And also, if Calvin Austin turns into a heck of a playmaker for the Steelers, it again alleviates the need to have to panic about the wide receiver position over the next couple of years. With Deontay Johnson on the final year of his contract, there's a lot of things that could happen there. So all that being said, yeah, I agree, Doug. They could handle those situations better. We'll see if they do. We got 2 more questions to address on this show. We'll do so right here on the Locked On Steelers podcast right after this. But first, I want to remind you this show is brought to you by FanDuel. There's always great chances to win on FanDuel, which is America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. If you're like me, football season being done doesn't mean I'm done with sports, because FanDuel gives you so many ways to play with the NBA, NHL, college basketball, and so many more ways to win with all the different sports and so much action. FanDuel has so many ways for you to end the season with a W or 2 or 3. You can make quick bets, make live same game parlays, get exclusive prop bets, and more. New customers, join today and you'll get $150 in bonus bets if your first bet of $5 or more wins. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to sign up today. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NBA. We're back here in the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. We continue taking your calls here on the show. And this is a call that I've gotten like several times right now. And when I say, I get a lot of phone calls. We get a lot of phone calls on the Locked On Steelers podcast hotline, and we appreciate it. We're not saying slow down. I love it. And I listen to all the calls and I log them and I put them in places like, okay, this is this person's topic. This is that person's topic. But sometimes we get certain calls that are like 4 or 5 times over, someone's asked that question. Trust me, the Kenny Pickett, Mason Rudolph questions, I have a lot of those. But this question I've gotten like 3 or 4 times, and I hadn't answered it yet, but I wanted to take a time here to answer it. Here's Dave from South Carolina with what I think is a reasonable question about how the Steelers could handle one specific position in free agency.
Hi, Chris. This is Dave from South Carolina. Glad to see a fellow Pitt law grad doing something productive. What do you think about the Steelers trying to bring Terrell Edmunds back in order to allow Minka to be more of a center fielder? I would imagine Edmunds will be a free agent this year and available at a reasonable cost. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Appreciate you, Dave, and shout out to another Pitt Law alum here. That's always cool to hear. But Dave, to the point of your question, I thought they should have brought Terrell Edmunds back last year. I thought they should have kept him. I thought they should have signed him back. As soon as he was on the trade market and it wasn't working out, they should have been calling him up from Tennessee and saying, "Hey, bring your butt over here. You're welcome here." And listen, I get Edmunds because I think they did offer him a contract at the end of the 2022 season, and he was just like, you know what, I want to go somewhere where I'm going to get more than just like a 1-year deal or a low level, a non-high paying contract. But the Steelers kind of knew what Terrell Edmunds' ceiling was. The ceiling was really good for them, but I think he wanted to explore free agency and see what he could get elsewhere. And he went to the Titans, and it wasn't a lot. He only started one game in the nine games that he played for them. And then he went to the Eagles, and it wasn't a lot. He only started 3 games out of the 7 games that he played for them. And I think Terrell Edmunds, when you look at how he has kind of worked out, he might say, you know what? That was nice and all, but I can go back to a system that I know, a secondary that I know, a safety partner that I know, and play a role that I was pretty good at playing that made me solid. And, I made millions of dollars with the team. I think it makes sense for Terrell Edmunds. The question is, does it make sense for the Pittsburgh Steelers? And the Steelers do still have Demonte Casey and Keanu Neal still on their roster right now. So, like, he's a guy who those are 2 guys that can still be there, but neither of those guys, and I've talked about this before on the show, but neither of those guys have really shined in the ways that can allow Minkah Fitzpatrick to go back to being a pure free safety that's center fielding and not worrying about playing in the box and lining up in the slot and all those other things. Terrell Edmunds, for all the things that he isn't, as far as a playmaker, a turnover playmaker guy, he is a guy who can help cover tight ends, help cover running backs, make tackles at the line of scrimmage, communicate well, and help in different spots. He's not going to be a super playmaker, but because of that, you could probably afford to go get him and bring him back on a cheap contract, let go of a guy like Keanu Neal and have Edmunds there. And if you want to draft a safety, you still can. And that way you have one strong safety who knows Minkah Fitzpatrick, who him and Minkah have a great relationship. They can work together. And then you have another young, strong safety that's learning to play the position and will someday be that guy next to Minkah Fitzpatrick. And here's the other great thing about it is that the Steelers have been loving using three safety formations for a bit. If you get an athletic guy in the early part of this draft who you like at safety, who can pair with Minkah and also be a trio with Edmunds, that could also be another way to solve your problems. So I think there's several ways to address this. Terrell Edmunds isn't the only free agent safety. I've talked with people about, Nick Faribault and I, where we're talking about Julian Blackmon. That would be a heck of a signing. But Julian Blackmon will be expensive. If the Steelers want an inexpensive safety right now, they should try to see if Terrell Edmunds will be like, hey, big head, what you been up to? How you doing? Hit him up with that kind of a text and be like, come back home, brother. I think that's what would happen there if the Steelers wanted to make that happen. But again, it depends on what Terrell Edmunds also wants. Maybe he still thinks he can hit well in free agency. Maybe he can still maybe he can still be a guy that can get some big money. But he is a free agent right now, unrestricted, and he's 27 years old. So like it makes a lot of sense. If I'm the Steelers, I'm making a call. He was only a $1.2 million cap hit last year. I'd take that in a heartbeat if I'm the Pittsburgh Steelers. And I'm not so sure that Terrell Edmunds, with, when I talked to my friends at Locked On Titans and Locked On Eagles, they were kind of like, what did anyone see in Terrell Edmunds? And then, like, listen, I'm a guy who I've defended Terrell Edmunds for years. People have said, oh, he's this, oh, he's that. Like, you know what? No, he's exactly what the Steelers need right now, and that's a partner for Minkah Fitzpatrick. So I'm right with you, Dave. Go get Terrell Edmunds. Wouldn't be expensive. Would give you one safety that I think would be really good for what you're trying to do on defense. They could still find another. We have another question. Our last caller of the day, Will from Altoona, about another free agent that he thinks the Steelers should explore. Here's Will.
Good morning, Chris. This is Will from Altoona calling back. Quick question. I heard that you mentioned maybe it was Ray or Allen had a punter in their mock draft. I was wondering if you have a thought on this guy from Buffalo that's been mentioned, that Matt Araiza is a free agent. Do you think we may look at somebody like that, or do you think we'll just bring a bunch of guys in and kick it out in preseason? Thank you. Appreciate your show.
Thank you. Appreciate the call in, Will. And also shout out to, again, all the callers who call in, even if you weren't on the show. On this show alone, we had New Orleans, we had Los Angeles, we had Plum, Altoona, South Carolina. We are all over the place with Steelers fans calling into the show. We thank so much for everyone who does call in and listen to this show from everywhere, wherever you are. But let's get to Will's question. So if you're not familiar of the story of Matt Araiza, he is a former Bills punter. He was picked in the 6th round of the 2022 draft, but he was not allowed to play because he was let go from the team because of a rape lawsuit that was brought up that had his name in it in August of 2022. I think he basically played in a preseason game, and then that was it. And then he's been a free agent since. But in 2023, that rape case, he was acquitted, or his name was dropped from the lawsuit. So he's not on the hook for that anymore. That's not something that's actually a thing that he has to worry about. So now there is a question about Matt Araiza, and would he be available? Now, if you don't know more about Matt Araiza, just go look up Matt Araiza. He's called the punt god. He was really good at San Diego State. That's why he was a 6th round pick at punter. And to be honest, I think, when someone asked me why, I've had a few people call in like Will and ask, what about this guy? What about this guy? Why not get Matt Araiza? And I'm like, listen, I'm not a punter guy. I don't know what makes punters good and what makes punters bad. I saw Presley Harvin punt. When I covered Pitt when he played against Pitt. I saw Presley Harvin punt like I ain't never seen nobody punt before. And I was like, that's the guy. And then he goes to the NFL, and then he stunk it up. And I'm like, that's not the guy. So for all I know, Matt Araiza could be great. He could be not. But I also don't understand the logic behind which punters get opportunities and which ones don't. Like Marquette King. Marquette King was a good punter in the NFL, and he didn't have a rape charge or anything like that or a lawsuit. He just annoyed people. It seemed like he kind of danced, and then all of a sudden he was untouchable, and he was just not in the league anymore. And I gotta say, I was really confused by that. And I'm confused. And as far as Matt Araiza, at least there's something behind that. Like, look, the league's not trying to be tied to any more PR nightmares. And so, and on top of the fact, like, if someone is charged with rape or in a rape lawsuit, yeah, the league should step away from that person. But now, if a person's name is cleared, if his name is really cleared, I do think the Steelers should, at least bring him in, see what it happens. But I think the Steelers should have a punt off this year. I think they could afford to go get a Torrey Taylor, the punter out of Iowa, who was really good for them this year. I think that he could be a guy that could be there. And there's a few other punters in this draft class who you could probably pick up either in the 7th round or as an undrafted free agent. I'd get, maybe a punter in the 7th round, an undrafted guy, and maybe a vet like a Matt Araiza. Bring him in to punt it off, have a punt off in camp. Whoever wins gets the job, and then you go from there, and hopefully you find your punter for the next several years or so. But that's why I saved the question for last, because I don't know jack about punters. I'm not going to pretend to y'all that I know jack about punters, but we'll see what happens. Is Matt Araiza the guy? We'll see. I think there's other teams that are also looking at him as a potential free agent signing, and we'll see if anyone signs him or if he's got the Marquette King touch and just can't be brought back into the league. But anyways, thank you, Will, and thank you everyone who called into the Locked On Steelers podcast hotline, 412-223-6644 to get your question on the air. I'm Chris Carter. Follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Carter Critiques. Read my work at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Find me here in the Locked On Steelers podcast every day, Monday through Friday. We're back tomorrow with more on your Pittsburgh Steelers right here on the Locked On Steelers podcast.